The cafe door swung open, letting in a gust of autumn wind that scattered napkins across empty tables. She sat there, coffee growing cold, staring at her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. No new messages. Her friend across from her was talking about work, something about a deadline, but the words dissolved into background noise. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying a conversation from 2 days ago, analyzing every pause, every inflection, every word he didn't say. This wasn't obsession in the clinical sense. This was something else entirely. Something that happens when a man understands the invisible architecture of desire. When he grasps what Niccolò Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago about power, influence, and the human heart. The greatest minds in history knew something most modern men have forgotten. That lasting impact isn't about grand gestures or perfect looks or manufactured confidence. It's about understanding the psychology beneath the surface, the patterns that govern how we attach, how we remember, how we can't stop thinking about someone even when logic tells us we should move on. She checked her phone again. Still nothing. And somehow, that made it worse. Or perhaps, if you understand what's really happening here, that made it perfect. What Machiavelli wrote about acquiring and maintaining power in Renaissance Italy applies with surgical precision to the realm of attraction and desire. He understood that human nature operates on principles that transcend time and culture. The mechanisms that made a prince unforgettable to his subjects are the same mechanisms that make a man unforgettable to a woman, not through force or manipulation in the malicious sense, but through understanding the fundamental patterns of how humans form deep, lasting impressions. The woman in the cafe isn't unique. She represents something universal. Right now, across the world, countless women are experiencing this same mental loop, this inability to stop thinking about a particular man. And if you examine these situations closely, you'll find patterns. The men who occupy this mental real estate aren't necessarily the most attractive, the wealthiest, or the most accomplished. They're the ones who, intentionally or accidentally, have activated specific psychological triggers that Machiavelli would recognize immediately. These triggers aren't about tricks or games. They're about understanding something deeper about desire itself. The modern dating landscape is cluttered with advice that misses the fundamental point. Be confident, be mysterious, be alpha, be vulnerable. The contradictions pile up until men are paralyzed, trying to be everything to everyone, succeeding at being memorable to no one. But if you strip away the noise and look at what actually creates lasting impression, what actually makes someone occupy mental space long after they've left physical space, you find principles that Machiavelli articulated in The Prince and his other works. He wrote about the necessity of being both loved and feared, about the power of calculated unpredictability, about why it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, but most importantly, about understanding human nature at its core. Apply these insights to attraction, and something remarkable emerges. A framework that explains why some men become impossible to forget while others fade from memory within hours of parting. The woman in the cafe finally puts her phone face down on the table. She forces herself to engage with her friend's conversation, nodding at appropriate moments, asking follow-up questions. But beneath the surface, her mind is running simulations. What if she texts first? What if she doesn't? What did he mean when he said that particular thing in that particular way? She's replaying moments like a detective, searching for clues, finding significance in details that might mean everything or nothing at all. This mental state, this preoccupation, this inability to achieve closure or certainty, this is the state that Machiavelli would recognize as the ultimate form of influence. Not domination through force, but occupation of mental territory through understanding the mechanisms of human psychology. And the fascinating part, the part that most men never grasp, is that this state cannot be created through pursuit. It cannot be manufactured through availability or eagerness or obvious interest. It emerges from a very specific set of conditions that seem almost contradictory to conventional dating wisdom. Understanding these conditions requires stepping back from what we think we know about attraction and examining what the evidence actually shows. Neuroscience has revealed that the brain's reward centers respond most intensely not to consistent rewards, but to variable, unpredictable rewards. The anticipation of a possible reward activates dopamine systems more powerfully than the reward itself. This is why gambling is addictive. This is why intermittent reinforcement creates stronger behavioral patterns than consistent reinforcement. And this is why the men who become unforgettable are never the ones who are constantly available, constantly predictable, constantly eager to please. Machiavelli understood this principle in political terms. A prince who is too generous becomes taken for granted. A prince who is too predictable becomes boring. But a prince who is strategic in his generosity, who creates anticipation, who maintains an element of uncertainty, that prince becomes impossible to ignore. The same principle applies here, but most men do the exact opposite. They find the woman they're interested in, and they become available, predictable, eager. They text back immediately. They're always free for dates. They make their interest obvious and constant. And in doing so, they eliminate the very conditions that create lasting impression. The woman in the cafe is experiencing something that psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember incomplete or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. Her mind cannot let go because there's no closure, no clear resolution, no satisfying end to the narrative. The man she's thinking about has, whether intentionally or not, left things open-ended. Their last conversation didn't resolve into a clear next step. His interest is evident enough to be real, but ambiguous enough to create questions. He exists in her mind as an incomplete story, and the human brain abhors incomplete stories. We're wired to seek resolution, to find patterns, to create coherent narratives. When someone denies us that closure, when they remain somewhat enigmatic, somewhat unpredictable, somewhat just beyond our full understanding, they occupy our thoughts in a way that people we fully understand never can. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the power of maintaining mystique, of never allowing others to fully predict your next move. In matters of state, this prevented enemies from preparing effective opposition. In matters of attraction, this prevents the feminine mind from achieving the closure it craves, keeping you present in her thoughts day and night. This isn't about being cold or distant or playing games in the petty sense. It's about understanding that value in all its forms is partially determined by scarcity and unpredictability. A man who is always available is like a book whose ending you already know. There's no compelling reason to keep thinking about it. But a man who has his own mission, his own purpose, his own life that doesn't revolve around her, that man becomes inherently more interesting. Not because he's trying to be interesting, but because he represents something beyond her immediate grasp. Machiavelli advised princes to be completely committed to their principality, to have clear purpose and direction that superseded personal comfort or the desire to be liked. This wasn't coldness. This was understanding that leadership requires having something larger than yourself to serve. The parallel in attraction is direct. A man with genuine purpose, genuine mission, genuine priorities beyond romantic validation naturally creates the dynamic that makes him memorable. He's not creating artificial scarcity. He's living a life that inherently includes scarcity of his time and attention, because those resources are devoted to meaningful pursuits. The woman checks her phone one more time before the waiter brings the bill. Part of her knows this preoccupation is irrational. She has work to do, friends to see, a life to live. But knowledge doesn't change feeling. The rational brain and the emotional brain operate on different tracks. And right now, the emotional brain is running the show. It's running scenarios, creating fantasies, replaying memories, searching for meaning in every micro interaction. This is the state that every man wants to create, but most never achieve, because they approach attraction backward. They try to make themselves unforgettable through effort, through pursuit, through demonstration of interest. But memorability doesn't work that way. You become unforgettable not by trying to impress, but by being impressive in ways that matter. Not by trying to be mysterious, but by having depths that take time to discover. Not by withholding attention strategically, but by having a life meaningful enough that your attention is genuinely valuable because it's genuinely scarce. Machiavelli's genius was recognizing that power isn't primarily about resources or force. It's about perception, psychology, understanding what moves people at the deepest levels. A prince with fewer soldiers but better psychological insight could outmaneuver a prince with superior forces but inferior understanding of human nature. In the realm of attraction, the same principle applies with perfect precision. A man of modest external resources but deep psychological understanding will occupy more mental and emotional space than a man of great external resources but shallow psychological insight. The question isn't whether you're the most handsome, the wealthiest, the most accomplished. The question is whether you understand the mechanisms by which you become unforgettable. And those mechanisms, as we're about to explore, are far more accessible than most men realize. They don't require changing who you are. They require understanding who you are and how to present that in alignment with how female psychology actually operates, not how we wish it operated or how we're told it operates. She leaves the cafe as twilight settles over the city. The streetlights flicker on. She walks home alone, and he's still there in her mind, an unsolved puzzle, an incomplete story, a source of dopamine hits every time she wonders what he's doing right now, whether he's thinking of her, what his silence means. This is the state we're about to dissect and understand. Not to manipulate, but to comprehend. Because understanding is the foundation of all influence, all impact, all ability to leave a lasting impression on another human being. And if there's one thing Machiavelli understood perfectly, it's that the world belongs to those who understand human nature deeply enough to work with it, rather than against it. Now, let's examine the specific principles that create this state, the Machiavellian strategies that make a man impossible to forget, that turn you into the person she thinks about day and night, whether she wants to or not. The first principle Machiavelli would recognize in the context of attraction is the principle of perceived value through demonstrated priorities. In The Prince, Machiavelli emphasized that a ruler must never appear desperate for allies or approval, because desperation signals weakness, and weakness invites conquest rather than respect. A prince who begs for loyalty receives none. A prince who commands respect through clear priorities and unwavering commitment to his mission attracts loyalty naturally. The application to attraction is immediate and powerful. When a man's priorities are clear, when he has something in his life that matters more than female approval, something he's genuinely committed to, something he won't compromise for the sake of romance, he automatically becomes more attractive. Not because women want to be deprioritized, but because purpose is inherently attractive. A man on a mission radiates a different energy than a man seeking validation. This isn't about pretending to be busy or manufacturing false priorities. It's about actually having a life structure where your time and attention are genuinely valuable because they're genuinely allocated to meaningful pursuits. When she texts you and you don't respond immediately because you're genuinely focused on work, on training, on creative projects, on building something, that delay communicates value in a way that no amount of peacocking or bragging ever could. The woman who can't stop thinking about you is rarely thinking about the man who's always available. She's thinking about the man who was present when he was with her, fully engaged, creating moments of genuine connection, but who also has a life that continues with purpose and direction when she's not around. This creates a natural scarcity that's impossible to fake convincingly over time. Machiavelli understood that true power cannot be faked indefinitely. Eventually, the foundation is tested, and if there's no substance beneath the presentation, the whole structure collapses. In attraction, this means you cannot fake having purpose. You cannot fake having priorities. You cannot fake having a life that matters to you beyond romantic validation. Women's psychological radar for inauthenticity is remarkably sensitive. They can sense when the man is pretending to be busy versus actually being engaged in meaningful activity. They can feel the difference between a man who's strategically withholding attention and a man whose attention is genuinely allocated elsewhere. The former creates annoyance and disinterest. The latter creates intrigue and desire. So the first step in becoming unforgettable isn't learning techniques or strategies. It's building a life that's genuinely meaningful to you, that genuinely demands your time and energy, that genuinely matters more than any individual woman's approval. When you have that foundation, everything else becomes natural rather than forced. The second Machiavellian principle is the power of calculated unpredictability within a framework of reliability. This is subtle but crucial. Machiavelli never advised pure chaos or complete unpredictability. A prince who is completely erratic loses the trust of his people and his allies. But a prince who is entirely predictable becomes boring and easy to manipulate. The sweet spot is being reliable in your core values and commitments while being unpredictable in your specific actions and responses. In the context of attraction, this means being consistent in your character, your standards, your integrity, but variable in your availability, your emotional responses, your specific behaviors. You're not hot and cold in the toxic sense. You're not creating emotional whiplash or playing mind games. You're simply not a completely open book. Sometimes you're highly engaged and present. Sometimes you're focused elsewhere. Sometimes you're warm and playful. Sometimes you're more serious and reflective. This variability, grounded in the authentic response to circumstances rather than strategic manipulation, creates the dopamine variability that keeps you interesting. The human brain is wired to pay attention to things that change, to patterns it can't quite predict. When you are completely consistent in all your behaviors, you become background noise. When you are variable within a framework of core consistency, you remain perpetually interesting. She replays your interactions because she can't quite predict what you do next. You're not following a script she's seen before. You're not playing a role she recognizes. Sometimes you text her first. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're deeply attentive. Sometimes you're clearly focused on other things. This isn't game playing. This is authentic response to the actual circumstances of your life. But the fact is that she can never quite settle into complete comfort or complete certainty about where she stands, what you're feeling, what will happen next. And that state of productive uncertainty, where the uncertainty is intriguing rather than anxiety-inducing, keeps you present in her mind. Machiavelli wrote about maintaining this balance in relationships with other states. Too much predictability made you vulnerable to exploitation. Too much chaos made you an unreliable ally. But the right balance made you a perpetually interesting and valuable partner. The same applies here. You're reliable in the things that matter, your character, your honesty, your standards. But you're variable in the things that create interest, your availability, your emotional expression, your specific responses to specific situations. The third principle is the strategic use of absence and presence. Machiavelli understood that a prince's presence should be impactful, that when you appear, it should matter. If you're always present, your presence loses meaning. If you're never present, you lose relevance entirely. The balance is being present with impact, creating memorable moments, and then allowing absence to create anticipation for your next appearance. Most men make themselves too available, too constantly present, either physically or digitally. They text constantly. They're always free to meet. They orbit around her social media. They make themselves a constant presence in her life. And in doing so, they become wallpaper. They become expected, taken for granted, part of the background, rather than a highlight of her experience. The man who occupies her thoughts is the man whose presence is impactful enough to be memorable and whose absence is long enough to be felt. When you're together, you're fully present. You create genuine moments of connection, of laughter, of depth, of chemistry. You're not on your phone. You're not distracted. You're there, engaged, creating an experience that stands out from the noise of daily life. But then you withdraw back into your own life, your own priorities, your own mission. You don't text constantly. You don't seek constant validation or connection. You allow space to exist between interactions. This space serves multiple functions. First, it prevents satiation. Too much of anything, no matter how good, eventually becomes boring. The psychological principle of hedonic adaptation means that we quickly adjust to constant stimuli, and it loses its impact. By creating natural spacing between interactions, you prevent this adaptation. Each interaction remains fresh and impactful, rather than blending into a continuous, undifferentiated experience. Second, Absence creates opportunity for idealization. When you're constantly present, she sees all your flaws, all your ordinary moments, all the mundane reality of who you are. But when there's space between interactions, her mind fills that space with imagination. She remembers the highlights. She replays the best moments. She creates a somewhat idealized version of you in her mind, and that version becomes impossible to forget because it's partially her own creation. Machiavelli understood this about leadership. A prince who was too accessible, too familiar, lost the mystique that made him seem larger than life. But a prince who maintained some distance, who was present for important moments but absent enough to remain somewhat mysterious, became legendary in the minds of his people. The fourth principle is emotional variability within authentic expression. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of being able to access different emotional registers depending on circumstances. A prince needed to be capable of mercy and cruelty, generosity and ruthlessness, warmth and coldness, not out of inconsistency, but out of strategic appropriateness to the situation. In attraction, this translates to emotional range and depth. The man who occupies her thoughts isn't emotionally flat or one-dimensional. He's not always the funny guy, always the serious guy, always the sensitive guy. He has range. He can be playful and then shift to depth. He can be warm and then shift to more reserved. He can be vulnerable and then shift to strength. This emotional variability creates richness in her experience of you. She can't reduce you to a simple category or type. You defy easy classification, and things that defy easy classification remain interesting to the human mind. We keep thinking about them, trying to understand them, to categorize them, to make sense of them. When you're emotionally one note, she understands you quickly and moves on. When you have genuine emotional range, grounded in authentic response to circumstances rather than performative shifting, you remain compelling. She thinks about you because she experienced different facets of who you are. She saw you laugh unreservedly. She also saw you deadly serious about something you care about. She experienced your warmth and your boundaries, your vulnerability and your strength, your playfulness and your depth. Each facet is authentic, a real part of who you are. But the combination creates complexity that keeps you interesting. Machiavelli understood that leaders needed this complexity to be effective. They needed to be loved by the people but feared by enemies, generous to allies but ruthless to threats, accessible to some but distant to others. This wasn't hypocrisy. It was the appropriate expression of different qualities in different contexts. For you, it means not flattening yourself into one-dimensional presentation. Don't be only the fun guy. Don't be only the deep guy. Don't be only the successful guy. Be fully dimensional, allowing different aspects of your authentic self to emerge in different contexts. This creates an experience of you that's rich enough to be memorable and complex enough to be endlessly interesting. The fifth principle is the maintenance of standards and boundaries. Perhaps no aspect of Machiavelli's teaching is more relevant to attraction than his insistence that a prince must maintain standards, even when doing so is unpopular or difficult. A prince who compromises his standards for temporary gain or approval loses the respect that makes leadership possible. A prince who maintains standards, who's willing to make unpopular decisions, who doesn't bend every time someone pushes, that prince commands respect and creates lasting impact. In attraction, this means having clear standards for how you're treated, what you accept, what you won't tolerate, and maintaining those standards regardless of how attracted you are to a particular woman. The man she can't stop thinking about is never the man who accepts poor treatment, who compromises his values for her approval, who's so eager to please that he has no clear sense of self. He's a man who has boundaries, who knows what he will and won't accept, who's willing to walk away from situations that don't align with his standards. This isn't arrogance or rigidity, it's self-respect. And self-respect is deeply attractive because it signals value. When you maintain standards, you communicate that you value yourself, which triggers her to value you more. When you compromise standards repeatedly, you communicate that you don't value yourself, which triggers her to value you less. Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, because fear is based on the certain knowledge that there will be consequences for transgressions, while love is fickle and based on emotion. In attraction, this translates to being someone who has clear consequences for boundary violations, not harsh or cruel consequences, but clear and consistent ones. If she disrespects you, there's a consequence. Maybe it's pulling back your attention. Maybe it's direct communication. Maybe it's ending the interaction. But there's always a consequence because you have standards. This creates respect. And respect is the foundation of lasting attraction. The woman who can't get you out of her head respects you. And she respects you because you respect yourself enough to maintain boundaries, standards, values that don't shift based on her level of approval or the intensity of your attraction to her. The sixth principle is the strategic use of validation and withdrawal. Machiavelli understood that a prince needed to be strategic about when he showed favor and when he withheld it. Constant favor created entitlement and complacency. Constant disfavor created resentment and rebellion. But strategic alternation between favor and its withdrawal created powerful psychological bonds. People worked harder for the favor of a prince who gave it intermittently than for the favor of a prince who gave it constantly. In the psychology of attraction, this manifests as the power of intermittent reinforcement. When you validate her constantly, compliment her constantly, show constant enthusiasm and approval, you create satiation. The validation loses its power because it's expected and constant. But when you validate her genuinely in moments that matter and then withdraw into more neutral territory at other times, each instance of validation becomes more powerful because it's not guaranteed. She works for it, she wonders about it, she thinks about what she did to earn it and what she might do to earn it again. This isn't about being cold or withholding basic decency. It's about being strategic with enthusiastic validation. You're always respectful, always decent in your interactions, but you are not constantly gushing with compliments and approval. Instead, when you do offer validation, it's specific, genuine, and meaningful. It lands with impact because it's not constant background noise. She remembers it, she values it, and she finds herself wanting more of it, thinking about what creates those moments of genuine approval from you. Machiavelli wrote extensively about how the withdrawal of favor, when used strategically, can be more powerful than the granting of favor. When someone is accustomed to your approval and you withdraw it, even slightly, they notice intensely. They think about it. They adjust their behavior. They work to regain it. This creates the mental preoccupation you're seeking to understand. She's thinking about you because she's wondering about your level of interest, your level of approval, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And she's wondering because you haven't made it completely obvious and constant. You've created productive uncertainty through strategic variability in validation. The seventh and final principle is the understanding that lasting impact requires depth of presence over frequency of contact. Machiavelli distinguished between princes who rule through constant visible control and princes who rule through lasting impression and established systems. The latter was more sustainable. In attraction, quality of interaction matters far more than quantity. One deeply engaging, emotionally rich, memorable interaction where you're fully present creates more lasting impact than dozens of shallow text exchanges or forgettable dates. When you are with her, whether in person or in conversation, you're fully there. You're not distracted. You're not thinking about other things. You're not on autopilot. You're engaged, asking meaningful questions, sharing genuine thoughts, creating moments of real connection. This level of presence is rare in the modern world, where everyone is half present, half distracted, scrolling while talking, thinking about the next thing while experiencing the current thing. When you break that pattern, when you offer genuine presence, it stands out powerfully. She remembers how you made her feel seen, heard, understood in a way that most people don't. She remembers the quality of your attention, the depth of your engagement, the feeling of being with someone who's actually there rather than physically present but mentally elsewhere. This creates emotional impact that lingers long after the interaction ends. And when you combine this depth of presence, when you're together with appropriate absence, and focus on your own life when you're apart, you create the perfect combination. She has powerful positive memories of your interactions, and she has space between those interactions to replay them, to miss them, to anticipate the next one. Machiavelli would recognize this as the balance between impactful action and strategic patience. You don't need constant contact. You need memorable contact. You don't need to be always available. You need to be impactful when you are available. The woman from the cafe, the woman who checks her phone repeatedly, who can't focus on other conversations, who replays interactions in her mind, she's experiencing the cumulative effect of these principles. The man she's thinking about has, whether intentionally or accidentally, activated multiple psychological triggers. He has purpose and priorities beyond her. He's unpredictable within a framework of consistency. He uses absence and presence strategically. He has emotional range and depth. He maintains standards and boundaries. He's strategic with validation, and he creates depth of presence in interactions. Each of these principles alone would create some level of interest. Combined, they create the state of mental preoccupation that every man wants to achieve, but most never understand how to create. This isn't manipulation. It's alignment with how human psychology actually works. It's understanding the mechanisms of desire, attachment, and lasting impression. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries. People think he advocated cruelty, deception, ruthless manipulation. But if you read his work carefully, you see something different. He advocated understanding reality as it is rather than as we wish it to be, and operating effectively within that reality. He advocated strength over weakness, clarity over confusion, strategic thinking over emotional reactivity. These principles apply to attraction as clearly as they apply to Renaissance statecraft. The man who understands them becomes impossible to forget not through tricks or games, but through alignment with fundamental psychological truths. You become memorable by being genuinely worth remembering. You occupy her thoughts by being genuinely interesting. You create lasting impact by understanding what creates impact and living accordingly. The path forward isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming more fully who you are while understanding how to present that in alignment with how attraction actually works. It's about building a life of genuine purpose and meaning, developing emotional depth and range, maintaining standards that reflect self-respect, being strategically thoughtful about presence and absence, validation and withdrawal, predictability, and surprise. It's about understanding that you don't make someone think about you by chasing them, by being constantly available, by seeking their validation. You make someone think about you by being someone genuinely worth thinking about and then giving them space to do that thinking. Machiavelli's prince didn't chase approval. He created conditions where approval was the natural response to demonstrated value. Your task is the same. Create the conditions, demonstrate the value, understand the psychology, and let the natural result unfold. She's still thinking about him as she lies in bed that night, phone on the nightstand, resisting the urge to check it one more time. She's thinking about him because he's activated something in her psychology that goes deeper than conscious choice. He represents an incomplete story, an unpredictable variable, a source of validation that's valuable because it's not constant, a presence that's impactful because it's not perpetual, a person with depth she's still discovering, standards she respects, purpose beyond her approval. He's become unforgettable because he understands, whether consciously or unconsciously, the principles that make people unforgettable. And those principles, as we've explored, are as old as Machiavelli and as relevant as this moment. Your journey to becoming that man, the man she thinks about day and night, begins with understanding these principles not as tricks to deploy but as truths to embody. Build a life of purpose, develop emotional depth, maintain standards, be strategic with your presence and absence, create quality over quantity in interactions. Understand that value is partially created through scarcity and unpredictability. These aren't techniques, they're ways of being. And when you embody them authentically, when they emerge from genuine development rather than performative strategy, you become the man that women can't stop thinking about. Not because you've manipulated them, but because you've become genuinely worth thinking about. The principles are clear, the psychology is understood, the path is laid out, What remains is your commitment to walking it, to becoming the man who understands how to create lasting impact, to embodying the Machiavellian wisdom that makes you unforgettable. The choice, as always, is yours. If this exploration of Machiavellian principles applied to attraction has resonated with you, if you recognize the truth in these psychological patterns, if you're committed to becoming the man who occupies that mental space in the woman you encounter, then I need you to take action right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to go deeper into these principles, exploring each one in detail, providing practical applications, examining the psychology even more thoroughly. This is just the beginning of understanding how to create the kind of lasting impact that changes everything about your interactions with women. Hit that like button if you found value here, because it tells me you want more content like this, more depth, more real psychology instead of surface level tactics. Leave a comment sharing which of these 7 principles resonated most with you, or share your own experiences with becoming someone a woman couldn't stop thinking about. What did you do? What worked? What didn't? Your insights add value for everyone in this community who's committed to genuine development rather than shallow gameplaying. And share this video with men who need to hear this message, who are tired of being forgettable, who are ready to understand the deeper psychology of attraction and lasting impact. Together, we're building a community of men who understand that true influence comes from depth, purpose, and psychological insight, rather than superficial tactics. The journey to becoming unforgettable starts now.